The other thing I would say is use the recruiter to your advantage, right? And so like, the squeaky wheel gets the oil type of thing, right? So if you're the candidate who doesn't want to take no for an answer or is not satisfied with the BS answer, be that candidate, Ask the recruiter. The worst thing they're going to say is no, and that just tells you they're not a good recruiter. And so you kind of constantly doing that as well. But yeah, I would say like in the case of this candidate and like in a lot of other candidates, I find like they make me do the work. Like they ask like, what will I be asked in this interview? How should I prepare for it? That makes me better, right? So then I will go and think, okay, I should tell them this, and it's my interest for the candidates to do well. So I always want to prepare them both from like obviously if they get the job it's great, but also I don't want myself to look bad in front of my client, like what kind of candidate you send over, right? So I would say like those are some of the things that make the candidate stand out, other than obviously like you have to have the right experience and all of that stuff, but these are like I would say the X factors.
Welcome to another episode of the Supra Insider podcast. In this episode, Ben and I were joined by Sunil Chaudhary, who is one of the folks leading product recruitment for Riviera Partners, which is one of the most prestigious exec recruiting firms in tech. Before joining Riviera, Sunil was a product leader himself. He was a head of product and a director at a couple of startups. We covered a lot of ground in our conversation, but in particular, we talked about what changes has he observed in the product leadership market over the last 6 months, how companies' hiring priorities for product leaders have shifted or remained the same. Also, we talked about how companies are getting more opinionated about what AI capabilities they want to see in the product leaders they hire. And also, if you don't have an AI background, how can you actually position yourself to break into an AI role yourself? We discussed what differentiates the top 1% candidates from the rest and what are they doing differently, which is really interesting. We also talked about compensation trends across super IC roles and management roles. And then we finished talking about current remote versus in-office trends and what does he think that trend is going in the future. If you're someone who is currently looking for your next role or are thinking about making the switch soon, you're going to find this conversation very relevant. Cool. We're live. Sunny,
Awesome.
welcome.
Thank you guys for having me.
Yeah, I'm really excited about this. So some quick context, we had Sunny as a speaker in the Supra community. People absolutely loved it. And that was like almost like over a year ago. So I'm excited to do a refresh since a lot of things have changed in the hiring market for product leaders. So maybe we'll start there. Sunny, what changes have you seen in the last 6 months when it comes to the product leadership hiring market?
Yeah, I would say largely the theme has been very similar, right? The lessons that were learned in 2023 are still being applied in 2024. It's basically like people want lean, people want to do more with less. CEOs are taking less risky bets, right? They want people who've done it before. And so I think like largely those themes are still very similar. What I've seen is last 2 months, and I don't know if you guys have seen that as well, is that there's like a significant uptick in job openings and people wanting to hire. Like it almost feels like a vibe shift has happened, right? And it's not just like number of roles, but types of roles have changed. And so it's almost like companies are coming out of a hibernation. It's like, okay, we've done enough of consolidating and like cost cutting. Now we need to double down on what we think is working. It could also be like last year, I think last quarter we had a similar uptick, so it could just be a false alarm, but it seems like more real this time. I think also AI is big, is a big theme, obviously, that has kind of dominated the whole thing. And now we're starting to see companies realizing what kind of AI roles they want to hire for. So there is a little bit of more clarity in terms of what they want, right? It's not just like we just want somebody who knows AI type of thing. So we're seeing some of those, but I would say largely, the lessons learned from 2023 are still applying. People have realized that, they don't want people who are just managers. They want people who can actually do stuff. And that's like the big thing that came out of that time period and that still continues to go.
Maybe a quick follow up there. when you said you see more roles and like for different type of roles, like yeah, like, can you give like an example of like maybe like what are some of those roles? Like I'm guessing you're mainly referring to product leadership roles.
Yeah, 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 yeah. And so I think like what we would see is in the last 2 years, what we were getting are some of those harder to fill roles. And so like the easier ones were still being filled by the internal recruiters, or because there were so many people already in the market, companies didn't feel like they need to go to an executive recruiter to do that. So we would get either like the companies in like a very specific domain and there are not enough candidates, or they've been trying to fill this position for a while and they weren't able to, so now they want to do it. And so now we're seeing more what we call like the normal roles that, and it just seems like there's maybe enough work that the internal teams can't do it. And now they have to go to the recruiters and like get this extra work. So that's one. I would say what we're starting to see, and again, it's not like that much different, but just comparing from the last 6 months, right? We're seeing different types of product roles. It's not just head of product. We need product that can do enterprise readiness. We need a product leader who can do security. We need a product leader to focus on this new bet that we're doing. So it's like different types of product roles, providing more options to people which weren't there before. I think that's like one of the things I've noticed.
And Sunny, just because I'm sure there's differences in kind of like what a Series A or Series B company is looking for versus like later stage. Do you have like a sweet spot of like company size and stage, or like business model or industry that you tend to kind of like focus on?
Yeah, yeah, great question. So, so last 2 years, obviously because there wasn't too much, so we were all kind of doing whatever was available, right? And then also I had just moved into recruiting, so I was trying to get a sense of where I would fit in better. So I did both early stage, growth stage, late stage companies. Over time, I've gravitated more towards later stage, and companies that are either Series C and above, or have hit a growth stride, but maybe want to grow even more, right? And the other thing I've noticed is like more domain wise. I think what I've again, like I did a number of different domains. I did consumer, I did fintech, dev tools, whatnot. And I've gravitated more towards infrastructure, dev tools, cloud, AI type of roles, less marketplace, consumer, so on and so forth. But again, like if there are, like, for example, even in my current workload, I'm working on a consumer product company, right? And so there are still examples, but that's where I tend to do more of my work.
And is it reading too between the lines that the reason why you're moving into that direction is because that's where the demand is? Like that's where you're saying like most companies hiring. Is that
Yeah, well, part of it, and I think this will touch in, maybe we can talk more about it. Is it's almost like you have to know where you're good at, and where my niche would be. So having worked in product, I tend to have a better understanding of some of these more technical products and why they exist and what's their need, as opposed to, let's say, somebody who's not worked in there and have just done recruiting. And like a consumer product is a lot easier to understand and pitch. I mean, yes, not to say that they're easier searches, they're still much more, a lot of more people can understand that. So I feel like there, like what you said, there's a lot of demand, and there seems to be like a lot bigger companies that are coming out of it. And also I feel like I bring a special set of skills and experience that can apply to those kinds of roles, and I can be more effective.
yeah? Another yeah, it seems like the trend that continue seem to be like, okay, we're still looking for product leaders that can actually execute, right? That are
Mhm.
not just managing people.
Right.
And then the other one is like you still don't want to hire someone that feels risky, and the way you're de-risking that is by finding someone that, if you're hiring someone for a Series C, you're looking someone who has gone from Series C to Series D or
Yep.
higher, right?
Yeah.
So I think that one feels pretty easy to spot, right? Like have you been in a company that has grown that much? But for the first one, like how do you actually can tell if someone is a product leader that's executing and not just managing?
Yeah, yeah, great question. I mean, I think so again, like part of it is like you guys have done products, so you know how people answer certain things and how they talk about things. There's signals you can pick up, right? So that's this generally when you're speaking with somebody. You do. We also have our own ways of verifying the story, right? So we do back channels. We will talk to people that you've worked with and kind of validate your story, so we know, like, what you're saying is what you've done. sometimes I think like this kind of goes into the hiring manager too. So what I've seen is like when there is, first time hiring manager or somebody who hasn't done a lot of hiring, they tend to then gravitate towards more like, let's do a working session, right? Let's do a case and let's kind of do a one-on-one session where we can see how you think and how you do all of that. Whereas I've seen people who've done like, hired 5 or 6 times and they've kind of been, they know what they're looking for. They're more or less on like, okay, let me just talk to you and I'll figure out how, whether you've done this or not. And I can ask you questions, which will give me a sense of, so I see that in the evaluation when people do that, how that could differentiate. But honestly, like, I think this goes on to the candidates too. Like oftentimes, when you're pitching yourself, be very clear of what you've done, like be able to highlight, so there is no doubt in the person's mind, like, oh, maybe this person isn't what it seems to be, right? And so I think like when I talk to candidates, and it's always like you can't always figure learn everything about person in 30 minutes. So you try and get some of those signals, and then you pass on to your hiring manager. It's like, let's maybe check more on this. I didn't have a big good enough signal on that. So we're kind of like working collaboratively to get to the right answer, but that's not to say that you won't end up with a bad hire. That happens sometimes also.
Yeah. I'm curious to kind of like spend a few minutes talking about almost like the AI product leadership job market. It's obviously a very hot space at the moment. AI, as is a big obviously field, but if you think about just like general AI, generative AI, and the kind of stuff that people have started talking about in the last like year or two, it's still nascent, and there's no one that's got like 10 years of experience of building products that are powered by OpenAI or something like that. I'm just curious, like, what are you hearing from hiring managers or founder CEOs who are hiring Riviera to like help them find product leaders that with a focus on AI? Like, what are they looking for with a
Yeah.
product leader if AI is going to be a critical part of the product strategy?
Yeah, and so like there are different ways companies are addressing that. Like, so some companies may have super technical people who kind of know, who are kind of driving the vision. So let's say if I'm building a very technical AI product, whether that's a platform or, a few months ago, a lot of people were doing LLMs and whatnot. And usually like the vision and whatnot is driven by a technical person. Some of those founders may have product skills, but then in that case, what they're looking to bring on is this product management skill. How do we take this and commercialize this? What is the motion for that? Who do we hire? And so it's less about domain knowledge in that sense. But even in that case, like they want people to be at least enough technical enough to be able to read papers and understand their audience, because a lot of this like we will be consumed by technical people. So that's like more on the technical AI piece. Then there's like a lot of application AI pieces, right? And so in that case, like product people at least are supposed to bring the customer knowledge, right? And how the paradigm will change, how the workflows will change, how users will use this differently. And that is like a whole different way of thinking about product, but in a way very similar to what product people already do, right? So it's not that much different. But I think like we're also seeing a maturing of what the AI role was a year ago and to what it is now. And we're also seeing some companies kind of crossing that, where we're not just an idea stage, we now actually have emotion. So you'll see like a marriage of like traditional product management skills with like, okay, here's a new technology which will change how people use stuff. How do we interact in that world? So I think like if you're a really good product person who's kind of done this a few times in your career, or even not a few times in your career, but you're very adaptable, I think you're definitely welcome in that. I would also say like there are like, the Gen AI is new, but there's a lot of AI stuff that was already happening, right? So we were seeing a lot of security companies using AI machine learning type of stuff to point out vulnerabilities and security loopholes. There's personalization and recommendation companies that do that. And so a lot of those skill sets still applies. And so like if you build complex technical product, work with data science people, it's the same thing. You're kind of doing it in a different setting.
It's interesting. I remember when I was leading product at Continuum, we used to meet with a lot of startups with founders who are looking to hire, whether it's an interim leader, advisor, there's always some kind of problem that they were trying to solve. And when we met them, we would talk a lot about what their goals were, what their expectations were, and then we would try to almost like calibrate what they're looking for. And often we would end up somewhere that's like slightly different, or sometimes very different than where we started. And I'm curious, in your experience, kind of meeting with the teams that are hiring you and Riviera, when it comes to these like AI heavy leadership roles, like how often do you find that they're very crisp on what they're looking for versus maybe like the definition of the job changes after they start kind of like talking to you about it?
Yeah, I mean, I think more of the latter, right? And I think and I would say I would actually caveat it like, so let's say AI first companies which are being led by visionaries, they're very clear on what they want to do. They may not be clear on who the right person will be to do that, and that's kind of the calibration that we do when we meet with them. But then there are other set of companies who are like, we have this thing and we want to apply AI to it, and those people aren't fully clear on where is and where we want to go. And so that becomes a slightly different conversation of, let's maybe filter out what is it that you're trying to do and who the right person for that would be. Now, oftentimes, like companies, the recruiters, depending on how good a relationship you have, you may not have the privilege to be part of that conversation. So we always come in, we've decided this is what we want to do, and this is the kind of person we want. So let's figure out where the right things are. And through that, we will try and unearth something. So like Riviera is a very standard, like you said, we also do the same thing. Like we say, what is the problem that you're trying to solve, right? And then the next question is, what is it that you're going to do, and what is it that this person is going to do? Because the clear responsibility division is very important, especially in product. And through that, like then we also ask, like, okay, so who's responsible, who will be part of the evaluation process and whatnot. And we try and meet with everybody to make sure that everybody knows what we're hiring for and it's been crisply defined. And again, it's an imperfect process, but that's kind of our goal, what we're trying to do. And so usually, to answer your question, Ben, like we might start here and then we may end up in a slightly different place, but hopefully a much clearer place.
Yeah. And I'm curious, you have so many data points of talking to, obviously both sides. It's almost like a marketplace, right? With like companies that are hiring on one side and candidates and people that are applying for the roles on the other side. I'm curious if we think for a second about the talent side of the marketplace, the candidates. Are there any things that you've found over the last couple of years that really turn off product leaders from wanting to lean into some of these roles? So if someone's maybe listening and they're like a CEO or a founder looking to hire a CPO or a VP product, like what they should almost like avoid doing, or like the red flags for really good talent?
Yeah. I think, a good talent is good because of a certain reason. Like they don't need a lot of supervision, and they need a big vision and mission to be able to, get excited. And they need a team or a believer who can like give them the opportunity to do that. And if that's not there, I think most good people kind of suss that out and then get turned off. And so how that would manifest is like, oh, if the CEO is not fully decided on what they want to keep and what they want this person to do. So there's not clear demarcation. And obviously, like in startups, things happen. Like you would take on things that you didn't plan on doing that. But I think like having this idea of, okay, I will define the vision. You're here to execute. That's good enough, right? Or if I don't know the vision, I want you to be able to do that. That's also really good. And then that kind of sets up the dynamics of how we're going to operate. The other thing I would say is which a lot of companies, and this usually happens in larger companies, not maybe in a smaller companies, is how you set up the role, right? And again, it kind of leads back to how much flexibility will I have to do this? Will I be set up in a role where I will be doomed to failure, right? And so people are trying to avoid that. And as candidates, we only get one chance, right? Every 2-3 years to prove ourselves. And you really don't want to, you should be even more risk averse than founders, right? You don't want to end up in a situation where you're looking to leave in 6 months. And unfortunately those happen. But people, I've noticed like those are some of the things that I try and get as much clarity from the founders or hiring managers. So then I can pitch to the candidates and talk. And maybe that's not the role, and that's fine. But then we need to have an expectation of who we can attract. But that's kind of what we're trying to get as much clarity as possible.
Yeah. Another big one for me is when I feel like the exec team doesn't really understand what product does. Then I
Yeah.
think then at that
Oh,
point you're just getting into like a very shaky
yeah.
foundation. But yeah, I think most people can probably suss that out pretty quickly
Yeah, I
in
wonder like what
interviews.
you hear from like yourself and Supra members, like what are some of the things that people are like, oh no, this is a red flag.
Yeah. Yeah, it's funny. Actually, our first episode that we recorded was on this topic of like, I mean, it was mainly focused on Series A startups, like early stage.
Like
But yeah,
first
I think a
product
lot of
hire.
it,
Yeah.
yeah, like being the first, basically like product hire.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think a lot of what you said, I think is consistent with what we did. I think in general too is another big one is like where are they in their product market fit stage. Like I think
Mm.
both
Yeah,
Ben and I are in agreement that yeah, you probably shouldn't join a company that hasn't found product market fit as a product leader, since that's the job of the founder.
yeah,
Yeah, I think
I,
another one is like just a good judgment of how much the founder wants to actually like delegate, and kind of like what's going to be their role, and if what they say and how they actually feel it's aligned. And again, that's probably the trickiest one to suss out, because they'll be telling you, oh no, I'm ready to fully like let this go, but
yeah, yeah.
I mean there's a lot of ways that you can do. Yeah, what about you, Ben? What did I miss?
so I don't know, because Sunny, you mentioned that sometimes, if as long as the expectations are clear, things can work. And if the person who's hiring is like, hey, like, I actually am looking for a product visionary to like help us go to the next scale. That's like actually one of those things that I don't think I've seen a lot of evidence that you could like hire that out successfully. And when it is positioned that way, it kind of turns out to not be entirely true, or the lack
Yeah.
of a vision becomes the problem. And
Yeah.
it's hard to kind of pitch a founder on what the vision for their company should be.
Yeah.
Yeah, that one's tricky for me. I feel like if there's not really a compelling vision that's easy to understand and get sold by, and in other words, if it's hard to drink the Kool-Aid yourself about the
Yeah.
vision, then I think
Yeah.
that can be really challenging, because you're going to come in, and if your job is to create the Kool-Aid, that's a whole extra job on top of
Yeah, and
running the product org.
that's a great point. Like if the founder doesn't have a vision or isn't driving the vision, what is wrong with this company? And sometimes that would manifest in a much later stage company where the CEO is kind of busy doing. Let's say you hire a later stage company, you hired a CEO who's more finance investor based. You need a visionary to drive product vision. That's maybe a better scenario. But yeah, Series A, if you're the first product person driving the vision, then what is the founder doing?
Yeah, I mean, as long
Yeah,
as you're a single product company, it seems to me like the
Yeah,
vision for the company and the vision for the product are generally indistinguishable
yeah,
in a healthy environment, right?
yeah, 100%. Yeah, yeah,
yeah, that's what I was gonna go. Is like probably the only exception is like if you're launching a new business line, and then at that point you might want to have that visionary. But yeah, if it's only one product,
yeah.
makes no sense. Yeah,
90% of the time it's like, hey, we've got where we think we have a product market fit, we've reached there, now we just need to build the machine, we need to like get to the next level, and that's like 90% of the roles that we get.
yeah. Another maybe kind of like staying a little bit more in this AI train. One question that I get a lot in Supra and comes up very often is, I don't have experience in AI, but I want to break into AI, right? And I think that's
Right.
probably like 95% of product leaders out there. And you're getting a little bit into this in a couple of questions ago, right? That when you're looking for candidates, right? You're looking, depending, again, it seems like the space is maturing and now people are a little bit more confident about what they want. But like it
Mhm.
seems like the two kind of key things that you mentioned was, one, like, are you technical, right? And then the second
Mhm.
one is like, have you shown that you're able to like adapt to new technologies, work with them, and actually ship something that's valuable, right? So I think the question that I'm curious for you, that I think would be really helpful for people, is like, how do you suss that out, right? When you're looking at someone's resumes, or what are some things that people can do today to like present themselves as they can be that person?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I would answer that question a little bit differently. So, I mean, there are certain AI roles where you may not be qualified for, right? So, just be clear on what you think you would be able to do, and then let's work from there, right? So, let's say if you are somebody who's done a lot of marketplaces but not a super technical product person, maybe you can work in an AI based marketplace type setting because you know that domain really well, you know the challenges. All you're doing is thinking of it in a different way. Like there's automation, there's more self whatever things happening, right? And so I think that would be the number one thing. Like try and figure out where your current skills are good, and then like highlighting those, right? So for me, like if I'm evaluating, like can this is this person adaptable, and what they will they be able to work in a different setting, which usually companies don't want, to be honest, at this point. But you can like try and see if people can do first principles thinking, right? Are they too caught up with this one experience that they've had, and then they use that every single time, or have they learned enough to be able to apply these lessons in a different place? And then you can, as you talk to people, you can see like certain industries are really hard to get into, and if they found success, I mean, this person can do the research, learn, and kind of be effective. So there are signals within their profile that they can talk about, and then you can learn from there. But for example, like let's say if I'm looking to place someone that wants to do something with data, for example, and they've worked with data their whole life, but maybe not in the exact same way, is that it's not too far fetched to realize that they could learn if they show enough of an aptitude, enough of smartness, and there are enough good back channels. It's worth a shot if you're not finding somebody who's an exact fit, right? And so from the founder's point, they always want to find the exact fit. But if you are not the exact fit, how can you be the close enough where you can have an edge and you can beat out somebody who's maybe an exact fit? This also, and this is something that maybe candidates should understand, is that this is and still is a very much like a winner takes all market. But that doesn't mean that companies don't want to hire other people, right? So if there is somebody who has that exact experience and there's 5, 10 companies wanting to hire, they will get a lot of offers. And that's what you would see like spike in comp and whatnot, but it's only for a very select audience. It's not for everybody else who's kind of, has a general product manager experience, but maybe not exactly the flavor of the month that people want. And so how can you use what you have and position yourself really, really well is something like I would encourage product people to think about. It's like, where are the opportunities in AI? What have you done that works well with that? And how can you position yourself, in a way that makes you valuable?
You said something. I just wanted to make sure if there was something interesting there that I double clicked on it. Did I hear you say that companies these days in the current climate might not be valuing the adaptability to new environments as much, or like
and this kind of goes into the risk averseness, right? So if I'm interviewing 5 people and 2 of them have the exact experience I want, while 3 could be adaptable, I'm more, no
got
one would
it.
fire me for hiring this person, kind of thing.
Got it. So and how often do you find, one thing we used to use is this term like a purple unicorn, like is what people wanted, is like they just had this like crazy expectation of the person that did, every single thing, every single
Yeah.
checkbox that they have. Like how often do you run into that in the initial expectations?
It happens quite often, and then I've thought about a lot, like why people get there and why are they thinking. And to me, it's like not enough thought put into what needs to be done, and like just thinking, wishful thinking that one person could do all of these things. Whereas if this role was structured differently, maybe you could get to the answer much faster if you break it up into different responsibilities. And so for me, like if company comes in, it's like I want somebody who's super technical but also can be a very social person and like go out and do all this stuff and build a team, and also knows this very obscure technology. I mean, you're kind of setting yourself up for failure. Yes, you may be able to find somebody, but there's also a good chance that we could be looking for this person a year from now.
Yeah, like I want someone that has had a ton of like 0 to 1 experience, but also has like scaled organizations and drove like
Yeah.
massive impact. Like it's
No, I had a classic one. This was like they wanted a product person who could also sell, but also has done 0 to 1 and can work as an individual contributor. And I was like, that person exists, they're already started a company. Like they're not going to come work for you. It's just how expectations have people. People have expectations.
Yeah. Another kind of question related to this, and is it something that I like heard mixed reviews on but some people feel very strongly about it. Some people are like, I'm not sure if that moves the needle. Is especially with like new technologies like AI, like how how helpful is to show that you've had a side project and that you've like kind of worked on the side on to work with this technology, and that because of that now you're like maybe not an expert but you know the technology well? Like, is that, does that actually matter? Like, does it move the needle? Or
I mean, it helps me understand that you're curious and you want to be in this space and you're taking an initiative that, obviously is all positive things. I think it matters most if it was relevant to what I'm recruiting, right? So if I'm like text to video generator thing and you worked on this video thing on your side, great. Like that's something that's super relevant. But beyond that, like I don't think it matters. It just shows initiative and that you really care about it.
Yeah, one of the things I'm also hearing is a lot of people are getting to that very final stage of interviews, and they're losing out. I recently talked to one person who's looking for a CPO role, and they felt like there was like a really good fit with this company, got all the way to the end, and they were told that they just didn't kind of like have the chemistry. What have you found about that factor of someone who's, made it literally all the way to the end, passed all the interviews, and then there's 2-3 finalists and they go with one of them? Like, what is it what's the determining factor that you usually see that makes them go with one?
Yeah, I mean, so that's a puzzling one because let's say if I was the recruiter working on this, I would probably have some signal that this person is not gelling so well with the whatever the interview panel. And so my feedback to them would be to do this. Now, let's say some person doesn't have that personality and they're not able to do that. Then what I would do is like try and get signals from, is that a hindrance for them to do their job? So this happened to me in another job where this person made it all the way to the final round. They just weren't inspiring enough, and we had looked everywhere for this person and we couldn't find the right experience, and we found this person and then they just rejected this person. And then I gave them that feedback, and then they said, "Okay, can I talk to the hiring manager one more time?" And then they spoke, and that resonated with them, like, hey, this person is fighting for this job, they really want this, right? Don't just give up. And then this person met the CEO, and the CEO really liked him, and then he got the job. And so it's like situations like these where the recruiter could play a really good part so this doesn't happen. Like, you shouldn't be rejected on chemistry at the last minute. Like, that's first thing you notice about somebody. Like, am I going to be able to work with this person or not? And so I would say that. But I think, like, generally speaking, like, as you're doing the interviews, I mean, you're also kind of seeing, like, am I going to be able to work with this person? Am I, and from the candidate side too, like, am I going to be, this is the group of people I'm going to be spending like hours a day, is this the right fit for me? And maybe there are some signals there that you can look at. I mean, I'm very perceptive, so I kind of notice that. So it's hard for me to see, and not to say that there aren't people that don't pick up on those signals, but it's something that the recruiter can help and be that intermediary.
yeah, I mean, it's definitely one of the trends that I've noticed a lot in the last 2 years, is that, yeah, a lot of people do tons of interviews, like 10 interviews, 9 interviews, make it to the final round. And then for a small reason that feels like you could have kind of figured that out, like in like the screening call or like in interview number 2, they get rejected. Like, oh, like actually, like, we're not sure if you have enough industry expertise, or, oh, we're not sure if like you actually have like the execution chops that you need. And I don't know, my sense is like that. I don't know. It's gonna come back to bite companies a little bit. Like, it's just like not the
Oh, for
best
sure.
look.
Yeah,
And
no,
like,
it's a bad candidate experience for sure. So my advice to companies mostly is like, the way I would ideally like to run my searches is, in the first week or two, we're calibrating, right? So we will send you more candidates. You pick your 4 or 5 people that you think, like, the hiring managers talk to as many as they want to, and then pick your 4 or 5 people that you want to send to the panel, and then be clear, like, okay, now what we're evaluating is leadership, this and this. And then clearly, like, after that panel, you pick your final two, and that meets your whoever the final interviewer is. In that case, like, you're kind of giving the signal to the candidates, like, these are the things we'll be evaluated on, and if you get rejected, it's probably because of this and not something frivolous as chemistry. Or unless, like, you met somebody in that meeting and you had past, like, beef with, well, that's a very different scenario. Or if somebody uncovers something back channel wise, that could happen. Like, sometimes companies aren't comfortable sharing that, and so they could just say, oh, it was chemistry, but it was maybe something else. So that could happen. But I think, like, that's how I try and set my searches is like, we're kind of progressing. So like why you're being picked and why you're being rejected.
Yeah. No, I mean that sounds great. Maybe one thing too that I picked up on is like, you clearly have like an insider perspective or like interesting tactics that people use to make it to that offer stage, right? Like I think that the really interesting thing that I picked up on is like, you know, 99% of the candidates when they're told, hey, there's no good chemistry, would have given up, be like, this sucks. But like
Yeah.
that one person like was like, actually, I think that's bullshit. Like I want to talk to the hiring manager, right? Like what are the top 1% candidates doing that's different, that's unique? That's like, yeah, that's giving them the edge, right? At the end of the day, which I think is what you need
Yeah.
in this
Yeah.
market.
No, great question. I think it all starts with, like I said earlier, like you have to know what you want and what you're good at. And then the next part is how do you position yourself, right? I can't tell you, so many candidates show up and answer this question. I'm open to everything. It's like, sure, but that doesn't help me or that doesn't help anybody. And people want people that are intentional, right? I don't know if you guys have, you've probably seen that who interview that a lot of companies do, where they basically walk through every single incident in your life and kind of ask you questions like why you chose that, why you didn't choose that. And all they're looking for is how intentional you are about your life. Or are you somebody that things just happen to you and you just kind of go with it? Right. So I think that is very something that you like good candidates have. They know what they want and they know their value and they're able to articulate it. Like, if you are not able to do that, you're already like not in the top, right? The second thing I would say is then like networking and being able to like not just, and this is not possible for everybody, so I totally get it, but like, know who the people are in your industry that will get you those opportunities, whether that's executive recruiters or talent partners or VCs or whatever. Get out there, get to know them. And so when the time comes, you're top of mind and you have access to those opportunities. Because half the time, like, you're not getting good opportunities, you don't have access to them. And so you're not top of mind for people to get there. And that's not saying like you constantly send them emails or whatever, but it's almost like, hey, every now and then you check in, like, hey, what's going on, whatever. Here's somebody, like, it's a mutual exchange. So I reach out to, like, you and Mark, like, I reach out to you and you reach out to me, and we're constantly in touch, right? So it doesn't feel forced that way. And then the other thing I would say is use the recruiter to your advantage, right? And so, like, the squeaky wheel gets the oil type of thing, right? So if you're the candidate who doesn't want to take no for an answer or is not satisfied with the BS answer, be that candidate. Ask the recruiter. The worst thing they're going to say is no, and that just tells you they're not a good recruiter. And so you kind of constantly doing that as well. But yeah, I would say, like in the case of this candidate and like in a lot of other candidates, I find like they make me do the work. Like, they ask, like, what will I be asked in this interview? How should I prepare for it? That makes me better, right? So then I will go and think, okay, I should tell them this, and it's my interest for the candidates to do well. So I always want to prepare them, both from, like, obviously if they get the job, it's great, but also I don't want myself to look bad in front of my client. Like, what kind of candidate you send over, right? So I would say, like, those are some of the things that make the candidate stand out, other than obviously like you have to have the right experience and all that stuff. But these are, like, I would say, the X factors.
Yeah, that last one is such a good point, and I think like not enough people think about it, of like that mindset shift of like of which team is the recruiter in, right? Like I think
Yeah.
a lot of times like people think the recruiter is in the company's team, right? And it's like me versus like recruiter plus company. But like what you're saying is like the best candidates actually are like, hey, like it's me and the recruiter kind of
Yeah.
like going together for this opportunity. And that is, yeah, that is such a powerful way to think about it. And if you do that, I'm also sure that you also feel like, oh, I want to see this person succeed, right? Like
Yeah,
I've
100%. Yeah.
yeah,
100%. You build a personal relationship with a recruiter, they want to see you succeed, right? Yeah.
It also boils down to just understanding the incentive structure for a retained search firm is
Yep.
like,
Yep.
if you can fill a role in 2 months, that's better for you than if it takes you 5 months or 6 months to
Yep.
fill that role. So
Yeah.
you are incentivized to find a really good fit as soon as possible, right?
Yeah, yeah. And the other thing is, like, like, minor things like that would turn people off is like if you're giving wishy-washy information. Like, even like simple thing as comp, right? People come and say, like, I haven't thought about comp. It's like, why haven't you thought about comp? You're interviewing, you should think about comp. And then the other thing is, like, this happens a lot more, is when people from public company want to work in a startup, that they don't fully realize how the comp will be different and what that would mean for them as their lifestyle, their family, and all of that stuff. Like that to me is often like I try and coach them. And my whole thing is I don't want this person to go to 6 interviews and then say, oh, wait, it's not what I thought it was going to be. So I prep them on day one. It's like, hey, you working at Amazon, this is what you probably make. This is what you're going to make. And this is your opportunity cost. Just mentally have that in the model as you're interviewing for the next, you're signing up for this for the next 4 or 5 years.
Yeah. I think that's a really good point. I have a couple follow-up questions on comp,
Mhm.
if you don't mind, because I think
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
top of mind for a lot of people. The first one is, and maybe I'll calibrate the question by asking, what's like the most, do you do like senior IC placements as well, like very super senior ICs, or do you only place, what we might consider like managers or directors or VPs?
So it depends. So if for technical roles, we will do sometimes like that, like chief architect. We've also done like people called VPs of product, but they're ICs because it was a new group that was being started, and so there's nobody to report. But they might eventually turn into a management role. So we've done some of those.
Got it. So one of the first question I have for you on comp is that one of the trends we've been tracking is kind of like the rise of the super senior IC, like these like principal level ICs, and how the compensation for a lot of these super senior IC roles is catching up, if not surpassing even maybe like middle management kind of compensation bands.
Yeah.
So I'm just curious, like, is that corroborated by what you're seeing in the market at the moment?
Yeah, 100%. And this kind of goes into the other trend where people want doers more than managers. And so they're willing to pay more for somebody who can actually execute and do stuff. Like if I'm a founder who has a really clear vision, but not enough hands to do, and if somebody can get me there, I'll pay top dollar for that person as opposed to someone that I will hire and then they'll manage 3 other people. That makes no sense. So I think like that's kind of what you're seeing happening there.
Got it. Okay, that makes a ton of sense. And then
I
the other,
mean,
yeah, go ahead, Mark.
maybe one follow up there is like
Yeah.
what about, so I think the one that I think that I'm clear on is like, yeah, I seen cash comp to be pretty similar, like of that super IC and maybe director or group PM, like be very similar, if not like exceeding it. I'm curious if like, is it the same with equity too? Because I've heard some people say actually, like if you're a leader, you get more equity than if you're a people manager or if you're a super IC or yeah, what are you, is there any differences in equity?
I have not seen that difference, but again, like it's not like I do hundreds of these, so it could be just that those specific roles were that. And to me, I think like the equity. So equity sometimes like in a bigger company is more about leveling, right? So even though you're IC, but if you're VP level, you get that equity no matter what. In a startup, I think it depends on like what impact you're going to make and how you negotiate and some of that, those factors. So it could be different, but like I think to your point, like let's say, and I think like manager type of hiring would happen in a slightly later stage company, which maybe has levels. So maybe it's like we're hiring a manager because there's a specific reason and they will add value, so they should get the same amount of equity as somebody who is still at the same level, but maybe an IC, but they're adding same kind of value. So I could see that, but yeah, I'm not sure. I don't know if I don't have like a lot of statistical information to say one way or the other.
Yeah. The second question I was going to ask you is more around kind of negotiation, maybe is like the bucket. And so I think of the scenario where company comes to work with you, has a certain comp package in mind, cash, equity, etc. What have you seen to be the strongest levers or the strongest reasons that end up causing companies to like flex beyond what that initial budget was? Like what gets them to do the extra spending, let's say?
Yeah. I mean, I think like if there is a really great candidate that they haven't been able to find, like that will in 100% of the time do the trick, right? But beyond that, I think like I will answer that question slightly differently, right? So sometimes like people, and this is kind of goes back to the people that are coming from public companies to startup, is that they don't understand how the comp works, right? So let's say I'm somebody who works at a big FANG company, I'm making $1.5 million. That includes my cash, bonus, RSUs, right? And then you could be like, let's say 500K for my base plus bonus and the rest in equity. So they'll come and say like, I'm getting $1 million in equity. I want the same amount of equity in this company? And that is the wrong thing to ask, because $1 million in equity of nothing is nothing when it turns into nothing, right? What you're really saying is, if I work here 4 years, I'm going to let go of this $4 million in equity that, mostly risk free if this FANG company keeps growing. What is the opportunity cost of that? What should this startup do for me to compensate that? So let's say if I'm leaving this for 4 years, I should at least make $6 million or $8 million. And so, Mr. CEO or hiring manager, show me the equity that will get me there. Show me the outcomes that will get me there, and then let's have a conversation on whether those outcomes are believable or not. And so, my advice to the founders always is like, have a likely outcome, conservative outcome, or whatever, like, a most optimistic outcome. Have comparables with other companies who might have been in this space to make it more realistic. Like, okay, if they were able to do it, we will be able to do it, and here's why. And then show them how this, whatever you're giving them, will be worth it. And that's a much easier conversation. And candidates seem to get that more. And then you can get what you want, right? So like, hey, if you are going to already make $5 million, it is not unreasonable to expect to make $8 million. You're taking this risk with this founder. And then, as opposed to you just asking for $8 million, so they might not have in their mindset.
What are some things that you think people don't negotiate often enough, but they should consider negotiating on?
Yeah, I mean, I think, well, just like, again, like talking about startups, it's what will your life be like, and like, if you're not coming from a startup where you're used to, being woken up at night when things go wrong, or, maybe the commute's too much, like all those things will add up in 6 months, right? So you may not be feeling it today, but you will feel it then, especially when things aren't going well. And so I would like be very clear on what you're signing up for and what the flexibilities are and what you can get. And that's very true for like female candidates, right? Like if they, if they need more flexibility, if they want to do other stuff, like that's something that you should definitely negotiate. Same thing on the benefit side, right? I mean, now most companies offer very standard benefits, like especially in tech, everybody has, good amount of money to keep their employees happy with the benefits, but at least be clear on it. Senior candidates, I would ask, like, I think people do ask this, but sometimes people don't, is what are like the vesting schedule, like accelerated vesting, like triggers, all of those things in case when things would go wrong. You obviously assume positive outcomes, but what if things go wrong? What happens in that scenario? The other thing I would say is candidates, some smart candidates, and this is to your other question earlier, do your back channels on founder, do your research on people that you're going to be working with. And I would say, like, have been enough cases where people ended up joining and the founder turned out to be crazy person, and then you had to leave, and which could have been found out beforehand if you had done some research. And like anybody could have done that. Like, obviously the VCs who invest in those founders have their reasons, but as a candidate, you're putting your life in there, you should be very careful.
Yeah, investing in a megalomaniac crazy founder is one thing, but working for that founder is very different.
100%. Yeah, that's what I meant. Yeah.
It's not exactly related to comp, but it has. You mentioned the commute as just like one of the things to imagine, and that kind of got me thinking about the in-person versus remote kind of environment right now. When are you starting to see any things like really changing when it comes to the, I need someone in San Francisco because I want them 3 days a week in the office or something, versus like we're fully remote? Like what's going on in your purview right now when it comes to these?
It's definitely more of in person now. At least the newer searches that we're getting, there is definitely a lot of in person. I just did a search which the company was based in downtown SF, and they wanted this person 5 days a week. And then in that case, like the founders are aware that then your candidate pool is narrower. Like somebody from San Jose may not be wanting to commute 5 days a week to San Francisco, but maybe Oakland, right? And so that is starting to happen. I mean, you've seen like bigger companies too, Amazon, Walmart. A lot of companies are doing like, hey, these are the locations we're going to prioritize. If you're not here, move yourself here, or we'll find somebody else, which is happening. And I don't know. I mean, I haven't seen a lot of data either way, like which way is effective. I mean, I have my own opinions, obviously, but companies feel that, and this I noticed that as a product person when I was doing remote even before COVID, there are certain things are challenging to do as a product person remotely while others are not. And so if companies are more conscious about what are those things that are challenging and maybe provide a more flexible environment, that could work. But I think everybody just kind of takes the hammer to the nail. It's like, if this is not working, let's everybody come back in the office and let's do it this way, you know? And so I feel like there's that happening right now.
Yeah. It looks like, yeah, like there's this trend of like everyone's slowly moving into office. I think like that's almost like a good question to answer interview process of like, what's your philosophy here? And like what do you think, where do you think you'll be in like 5 years? Because yeah, I think I'm definitely seeing that trend, a lot of people going back to the office. Awesome. Well, Sunny, I think Ben and I could talk to you for hours, but I know we're coming out of time here. So two final questions for you. The first one is, where can people find you?
You can find me on LinkedIn. I think that's probably the best way to reach out to me. And sometimes I may be late in responding to your messages, but feel free to ping me back. I won't be offended. I will definitely respond.
Awesome. And then the final question is, how can the audience be helpful to you?
I mean, I'm always reaching out to people for ideas and stuff, so respond to my messages. But helpful conversations. If you even like if you need some kind of help and you reach out to me, that's a connection for me. Like I'm in a business where connections is my currency. So the more people I know, the good it is for me. And so if you feel like you need some advice or you have a friend who needs help, please feel free to reach out. And that's valuable to me.
Amazing. Thanks so much for coming on. That's a wrap.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. This was so much fun. It just felt like a conversation, like you said.
Thanks, Sunny. Yeah, that was awesome.
All right, take it easy, guys.
If you enjoyed this conversation, please share it with someone who you think would benefit from it as well. We really appreciate it. We'd also love a follow or a rating on Substack, Spotify, or YouTube. That's going to let other people find us. And if you have any topic recommendations for a future episode, please send myself or Mark a DM on LinkedIn. We'd love to hear from you. Thanks.